Your lectures?
Yeah.
Wow.
It makes it easy for people who can't make it. So, hello. Thank you guys for coming. It's good to see some people, of the community. So, my name is Dr. Taylor Goodwin. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I fairly recently came from Arizona, which is a bit of a green shock. It's a little different. So, I have a clinic down in Jay, and I've just been doing community seminars for a few months. I like plants. That's an understatement. I like them a lot. I've been kind of dealing with them since I was around 9 years old. When my mom, wisely or unwisely, depends on who you ask, got me a book that was something super scientific, like Better Homes and Gardens, I don't know. And it was about herbs. And on page, the first page of the herbs, it had Achillea millefolium. And that's yarrow. And I started reading about how Achillea was used. It had little bits and blurbs about it, how it was used by the mythical Greek hero Achilles to stop blood flow from one of his soldier friends. And I was hooked. It's like, oh, plants are potions. So it was great. After that, my mom had a time keeping me out of our neighbors' yards. Taylor, stop pulling weeds in the neighbors' yards. I've matured now, though. So now my wife pulls me out of my neighbors' lawns. So. But really, plants are fantastic. As a naturopathic doctor, one of the reasons I went that way is my love of plants. Also, just because I did a lot of research, I also went through a number of different medical programs. But a naturopathic doctor is, well, a doctor who went through medical school, that's a good start, but specialized in alternative medicine. And that includes things like diet, lifestyle, exercise, and all your basic sciences. I also learned about pharmaceuticals. But we also learn things like acupuncture, hydrotherapy, and my favorite, what you guys are here for today, herbs. So with that extra refinement of the knowledge, it's become something that I've been able to use and kind of hark back to my childhood days of, I get to make potions! It's so much fun. I could tell you some fun stories about how herbs have been able to help a number of patients. I've had psoriasis patients have their itching go away in under 3 days. Not always the case, but I've seen that. I've had people who had migraines 25 days a month go down to being, they were non-functional 25 days a month, and now they're up to only, They're functional around 28 days a month now. And those are because of herbs. So, when we're talking about some of these, unlike my 9-year-old self who thought it was make-believe until I was around 20, they actually work. They actually do a lot of cool things. And today we're going to talk about some that grow in the area. I like to break these seminars up into 3 sections. Section 1, we're going to talk about safety. The reason for that is because anytime a small mistake can lead to a big consequence, we want to know what we're doing. There are some herbs that are not friendly, so to speak, or at least not forgiving. If you know how to identify lookalikes safely, you can be safe in what you're doing, but you need to be able to do that.
Like
so we're going to talk about safety. Yeah, mushrooms for sure. Those are some of the least forgiving ones out of all of them. Section 2, we'll talk about 3 plants that grow locally. We'll talk about some stories. We'll talk about their herbal actions. We'll talk about how to identify them. And I'll probably get distracted and tell you some other stuff too. 3rd section is for just talking about some of the events that I have coming up and then taking questions. Spoiler, I tend to run my mouth, so there might be a little less time, so feel free to just raise your hand with questions throughout. That way we can get the important stuff out of the way and then I can mush the events into a 2-minute blurb. So, with that, let's go ahead crack into section 1, a little bit of safety. So, for this, I like to tell a story. I was halfway through medical school and all the way through being a medical student. Pretty toasty in my brain. I was pretty done. And I saw a selective come across the course registration that you can do. Most of them are locked in, so you don't have that much choice after you make your specialties. But one of them that came up was a trip to the Colorado Rocky Mountains to go and study herbs in person. What I read was vacation. So I paid an arm and a leg and went on that trip for a week, and I got to learn under a well-respected herbalist. And we went and we learned lots of things for the week, but on the last couple days of the trip, we went up higher into the Rocky Mountains than we had before, higher elevation. and we were looking for a very specific plant. And it's known as Osha, or bear plant. It's a plant that's sacred to the Native Americans, and every Native American tribe that lived near Osha considered it very important or sacred and used it because of how effective it was for a number of things. Ligusticum porteri is the Latin name. And we hiked up the mountains and we arrived where the stand that she knew about was supposed to be, and it wasn't there. She said, all right, well, sometimes this happens. Shoo shoo, you flock of 30 med students, go identify wild arnica and wild violet. One has a heart-shaped leaf, one has a triangle-shaped leaf, and see if you can tell what geometry is. So we went out and argued about whether this was a pointy heart or a rounded triangle for about 30 minutes. And then she called us back, and on the way over to the Osha stand that she had found, one of the students leaned over to the rest of us and said, she's going to tell us something really cool. She's going to tell us how to identify it and tell it apart from something else. You'll know it when you hear it. Just make sure that you hear that part. We arrived, and she starts telling us about Osha. She tells us about how it's called bear plant because in Native American tradition, the bears would use it as medicine. And, in fact, that's been verified. There was a zookeeper who took some Osha and tossed it into the bear enclosure. And Papa Bear came over and he picked it up and he started chewing on it and he was really enjoying it, and then he froze. And then he brought it over to Mama Bear because he was a good Papa Bear. And he dropped it in front of Mama Bear. And Mama Bear picked it up and she lathered all of her fur up and she chewed it and she ate it. She got it all over and then she rubbed against the wall to get all of the lather deep down on her skin. Over the next several days, so Mama Bear had bear arthritis, which is the same as human arthritis except for bears. And she was moving a lot better over the next several days. And this behavior in bears, you don't see them eat in this way where they lather up and rub it into their skin with any other food. This is them using it as medicine, and you can see the results. Also, Mama Bear had been grumpy at Papa Bear for a while, and Osha raises oxytocin, and so that's the bonding molecule. Papa Bear gave away the Osha, and after that, Mama Bear and Papa Bear made up, so that was fun too. But she told us these fun things about Osha, really good for joints. But then she closed and said, that's Osha, after telling us a few other cool things. And the student who said, listen for the identification tip, raised their hand and said, excuse me, we've just learned how to make medicine out of this and give it to our future patients. How do we tell this apart from poison hemlock? And she said, oh, by the smell. Kind of similar. We were all learning to make medicine out of this. That's a pretty significant thing. I remember looking over and there was one gal named Leah, and she just had this horrified look on her face. Oh my gosh, that's important. I tell this story for 3 reasons. Number 1, this herbalist who I would still learn from, she really knows her stuff. She just forgot one detail. She was in presenter mode. So first thing is, whenever you're learning about plants, where there can be a problem if you get it wrong, you want to have more than one source. My name is Dr. One Source, okay? So try to have more than one source, especially if you're learning while it's in presentation mode. People forget things, that happens. Number 2, remember that the Osha looked a lot like poison hemlock, right? So we want to be able to identify things for sure because, spoiler, poison hemlock is poisonous. So be sure on your identification. And then number 3, win is not for us, but it's for the plants. I have a handout up there, by the way, if you're interested in having some of these notes. If you are harvesting a common plant, you can take up to half, and you're pretty safe and not over-harvesting the plant, because they can go extinct, especially in a local area if we over-harvest. If it's an uncommon plant but not endangered, then you can harvest up to 1/3, leave the roots and the flowers if you can, but technically you're still okay. If it is endangered, take nothing but photographs, leave nothing but footprints. Osha had just come out of being endangered by, 5 or 10 years, which is recent-ish by standards. So all 30 of us med students, it was ethical for us to take 1. We didn't take any more than that. because OSHA had made a recovery, but we didn't want to push it back. So there are some plants here that are actually in that category as well. American ginseng, I won't teach people how to identify it. I also won't harvest it unless you grow it yourself. That's endangered. Another one, golden seal. I had some people ask me to teach about golden seal because it's got some really cool properties. Not in a harvesting class. It's endangered. So there are a few that we don't want to touch. So for the rest of safety, if you're on medications, this isn't really part of the story, it's just FYI, over 70% of all of our medications are originally sourced from plants. And then they're either concentrated or adjusted. So it makes sense that we're going to have a little bit of interaction potential between those. A lot of plants are what the Cherokee, in their native tradition, they had food-grade plants, medicine-grade plants, and poison-grade plants, is how their traditional healers categorized plants. Food-grade plants, I like that particular system. I'm trained by another system, but food-grade plants are usually safe. But occasionally you'll find one that'll get you, grapefruit. Sounds really scary, and yet it's only on it's on like a third of all medications to not have grapefruit at the same time. But just make sure you run any medicinal plants by your doctor before you go ahead and use them. So that's safety, the most riveting part we're going to have tonight. Any questions on any of that? All right, then let's crack into the fun part. So we have 3 plants that grow here in the Ozarks. It feels like half of my entire Materia medica grows here wild. It's amazing. I had my mind blown when I first got here. Here's one that's pretty common. Here, I'll pull the leaves out. I think we've got few enough people to make that work. Anyone want to take a guess on what this is?
Mullein.
Mullein. Awesome. We've got someone who's been outside. That's great. So, mullein is extremely fuzzy, and the leaves can get up to like 5 times bigger than this. So this was a fairly young mullein when I went ahead and took it. Mullein, the word mullein, is actually one of the oldest words in the English language. It's so old we're not even really sure where it came from. It's been used for thousands of years as a plant, and it's had that name. It might have shifted slightly over the centuries, but we have 2 guesses on where that name might have come from originally. It might have come from the old Latin word mollus, meaning soft. That one was a little scratchier than it would have been when it's fresh, quite soft. It also could have come from another word that I won't even try to pronounce, but it means cow lung disease in extremely old Latin. Why this would be called soft, I think makes sense. Why would it be called cow lung disease plant? It's because that's what they gave to the cattle. And that hints at what it's used for still today. The leaves are extremely good for lung health. So if you're noting down herbal actions and what we can do with plants, this would be called a lung tonic. It helps the lungs function better. It does this in a variety of ways. One of them is we have little fingers on the insides of our lungs, little hairs, and they wave like this. They're called cilia. And they move all the stuff that gets lodged in the lungs up. And then that makes so that it gets to the point where we can cough it out. So it gets the garbage up and out. That really helps lung health. It does not like particulate being inside, the lungs don't. And so this activates the cilia, mullein does. It also helps specifically with pectoral or lung lymph movement, lymph nodes. Lymph nodes are our little TSA checkpoints. That's where we send a bunch of fluid through that came originally from the blood. And if there's any illness that hasn't been detected in the body, or even one that has, moving lymph, all those lymph nodes are concentrations of tons of soldiers that are just waiting and watching everything that passes through to see if there's a problem. And so if we're sick, or we want to avoid getting sick, having lymph movement is really helpful to go ahead and help with that. It boosts our immune system, is a simpler way to say it. And so this is a lung lymphatic, or lung lymphagogue. Fun story on that. So I talked about the ciliary movement and the lung tonic. It's also an expectorant, by the way. It'll make hard coughing get gentler, and no coughing it will bring up to medium coughing. So it's a mixed expectorant that brings you to the middle. You'll get a medium cough, whether it's too hard or too soft, it'll bring it to the middle. Most expectorants only move one way all the way, or the other way all the way. So this one's pretty cool. But a fun story, back when I was first playing around with Mullein, around those days my wife got sick. And I was so excited. I was like, yes! So I was like, you're coughing, right? Yes, clearly. All right, keep doing that. Went out, grabbed some Mullein, made a tea of it. I've mashed up the leaves. You always want to bruise leaves super well because the cell walls are really thick and the good stuff doesn't come out unless you bruise the plant. And then I put it in a cup of hot water and I stared at it for the full 10 minutes and then I gave it to her. And then, bless her heart, she has really sensitive taste buds, so she can actually, like, you know, the top 10%, 5% people who can taste more than everyone else, she's one of those. So this was true love when she picked the cup up and started drinking. She drank about a third. Oh, flavor's not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. Yes, husband moment, yes. Thank you. She drank 2/3. And at 2/3, she was like, she'd been sipping it, so this had been a couple minutes. Wow, my throat's feeling better. I don't feel like I have to cough. That's really weird. And I was like, yes. And then she drank the last third. And she started coughing like gangbusters. There's one other thing about Mullein that Mr. Experienced Doctor Boy didn't remember. What is this coated in? Little hairs. What happens when you bruise a plant fiercely?
They settle.
They settle, they come off, and there were hairs all over the bottom of her cup. And she had just gotten, boom, a throat full of hair. She was coughing for the next several hours. So, pro tip, hairs can come off. And they're not a mixed expectorant. They are just a stimulating, very stimulating expectorant. It'll make you cough. So, learn from my mistake and don't be sleeping on the couch. Make sure you filter your Mullein tea, okay? Very nice though, and after, she didn't make me sleep on the couch, she's nice. But make sure you filter your Mullein tea and you'll do a lot better. Little side tip, some people say this has another use. It's one that I don't advocate a whole lot. They say it was Indian toilet paper is what this used to be called by some people. Now we maybe say Native American, and even that I'm not sure if that's really kosher. You know, it's not a very flattering name. Those hairs come off down there too. Don't do that, okay? So, some Boy Scouts have had some really fun experiences, let me tell you. But the leaf is also good for helping with burns. Speaking of Boy Scouts, if you go ahead and get a burn on campfire, Mullein, you grind that up and you put it over the top as a poultice. It can help bring some of the inflammation and the pain down. So that's Mullein, the leaf. Some of you, when you heard Mullein, maybe, if you're familiar with it at all, what you might have heard was not about the leaf, but what you heard before coming here was about the flower. That's the most commonly known part. It's a little yellow flower. And I need to get an example, but I left my flower spike at home. But Mullein grows its second year with really tall spike flowers, and then there's like one circle of yellow flowers each day as it goes up the spike until all of the buds have flowered. And those yellow flowers you can see for a long way. But those flowers, if you pick those guys off and you put them into oil and make an herbal oil extraction, so that it's now a Mullein flower oil over 2 to 6 weeks of draw time, and you take a couple of that, a couple drops of that, it's something that's very helpful for new parents. Their children, children often get earaches, and some children have them recurring, and it's no fun. Lots of crying, lots of pain. Mullein flower oil, if dropped into the ear, provided that they do not have ear tubes. If there's ear tubes in the ear, we put this much things in the ear. 0, not infinity, 0. But if they have patent or whole tympanic membranes, a couple drops of Mullein flower oil will do 2 things. Number 1, it is a spasmolytic. Spasm makes us think of muscles spasming. Lytic means to stop or to cut or to break. So spasmolytic means stop muscle contraction, spasming. And Mullein flower oil does that. We have some muscles up here that when we're in pain, they tighten, and it can make it hurt a little more, especially if pressure is a problem. And it can also make our eustachian tube, which is where we drain out fluid. If there's too much fluid behind the ears causing pain, it can make that tighten too, so the fluid can't leave. So that's one way that it helps, spasmolytic. The other one is pretty direct. It's anodyne, meaning pain relieving. It's mild, but it helps, and it takes the pain away. And so the mom comes over and she puts the Mullein drops in both ears, and then the baby stops crying until 4 hours later when it starts again. There's one action that Mullein doesn't do. But occasionally people who are familiar with the traditional ear drops, they don't catch this. It's like, it's supposed to be working. Why has my baby started crying again every 4 hours? It's not antimicrobial. So it doesn't take care of the initial problem. It doesn't kill off the infection. And so if you're doing Mullein flower oil, it's best if you mix it with an antimicrobial that's friendly for kids, like garlic. Garlic is really punchy. It's so common that it seems like it should be mild, but it's actually a really good herb. I prescribe it often. And so if you mix garlic oil and Mullein flower oil, you get a really nice drop for ear infections. So there is one other part of the Mullein plant that has good herbal action. And this is the one people almost never have heard of, actually. Even in herbalist circles, it seems less common. And that's the root. The root has one of my favorite actions, partially because I have reactive arthritis, which is a disease of the connective tissue. This should be quite painful. But Mullein root is a connective tissue tonic. It helps with cross-linking in the connective tissue. Connective tissue, where is that again? Oh, well, you know, we have ligaments and tendons that are connected to our bones and our muscles. Those are connective tissue. We have fascia that covers and coats all of our muscles and wraps them, and also helps keep everything in place, and it prevents hernias. That's connective tissue. We also have, well, I always look around and I always am like, there are no bricks here, but pretend that this is a brick wall. We have a brick and a brick and a brick. And then in between the bricks, we have mortar, right? Mortar, so the bricks are like our cells. And the mortar is like what holds all of our cells in place. And that's called matrix and a whole bunch of other cool things. That's connective tissue, as is the basement membrane that they're all attached to. So if your connective tissue, also joints, connective tissue. If your connective tissue starts getting mucked up, which is common, guess what part of you hurts? You. It's not super fun. People are predisposed to get hernias because their connective tissue is weaker. They're predisposed to get dislocations because their connective tissue is not as, because their tendons and ligaments get less stiff. They're supposed to be stiff. And fibromyalgia, that's autoimmunity against connective tissue. Painful. But if we can use Mullein root, that's a connective tissue tonic that helps restore some of that cross-linking. So it's really useful to have one of those. I like mentioning this because if you go to the grocery stores, there are some medicinal use plants in there. There aren't a lot of them that are connective tissue tonics. It's something that's missing in the average American diet that we used to have. And so the root primarily is for connective tissue and connective tissue related inflammation. Helps rebuild it, helps calm down what's going on in the area. It's not one that I would use all on its own. I would be using some other things. We want to rebuild the connective tissue, but you also want to take care of whatever is irritating in the first place. Otherwise, you're fighting an uphill battle. But it's a very good adjunct or addition into your herbal preparations. So, Mullein, few ways to identify Mullein. It's a 2-year plant. Year 1, it gets about yay tall, but all the leaves are coming out of the ground. The leaves can just get really long, and so they can come up that tall. And it grows in what's called a basal rosette. All the leaves coming from a central point in the ground, no stem. The leaves, they are this shape, and they are extremely soft and fuzzy and large. This is a small one. Again, you can get them quite large. Year 2, it has saved up a lot of energy in year 1 to be able to do what it, to be able to reproduce in year 2. By the way, it saves that energy in its root, and so the best time to harvest roots for almost any plant, but definitely for mullein, is at the end of the first year when it's going into winter, or at the beginning of the second year when it's just coming up in spring. Because if you harvest it at other points in time, there's not that much stored down there. But in the second year, the basal rosette forms again, but then you have a stalk coming up in the middle. And that stalk will have yellow flowers that come in that sequence that I mentioned earlier, 1 layer at a time, all the way up. After it flowers, the plant will die. It only lives 2 years. And so at that point, after it flowers, there's not much good medicine left in it. It's spent everything that it has. The leaves you could still get something out of a little bit, but after the flowers are gone, it's kind of going far downhill. I mentioned the flower stalk. Fun thing about that, actually there's a number of fun things. I mentioned how its name comes from thousands of years ago. It's been used that long, not just for cow lung diseases, but the Roman soldiers actually would take the mullein stalk and they would shuck all the leaves off of it and dip it into tallow, and then they would light it, and they would have a Roman torch, and it would last lots longer because of the fibers that go up and down the stalk don't burn very quickly, and so they would have a torch that lasts a long time. A little bit more whimsical, in medieval ages, if there was a young lady, a fair maiden, walking down the dirt path, and she had her mind wander to her love, she could look and cast her eyes about, looking for a mullein plant, and then she would say, "Oh, mullein plant, is my lover true?" And then she would bend the mullein stalk down, and she would let go. And if the mullein stalk came back up, all was right in the world. The sun was shining, and the air was fresh and clean, and her love was true. But if it didn't come back up, something was not right in Denmark. And that husband might get a talking to. And I have wondered many times how many husbands got talking to because mullein plant's roots weren't quite deep enough. But it indicated, they believed, that it meant that there was unfaithfulness that had happened. And so I always thought that was kind of fun. It also showed up in the Iliad and the Odyssey when Odysseus lands on the Isle of Circe. It's supposed to protect him against the sorcerers there. So it's got some fun things where it pops up through history. It's been used in many cultures, and that's because it's effective. It is very gentle, though. It's usually something mixed with other plants. All right, so any questions about mullein? Verbascum thapsus.
Is it spelled M-O-L-E-N?
It is spelled M-U-L-L-E-I-N.
Oh.
It's a little bit weird with the E before the I, but that's just to make sure that that rhyme is never right. All right. So, here's our next plant. If any of you have been here before, you might know that the only kind of press that I do is a rapid press, and I went on a trip right before this one didn't check on it, so it looks beautiful, doesn't it? But anyone want to take a guess what this is? Besides unhappy. Mulberry? Mulberry's not a bad guess. It has kind of that rougher texture looking thing. This one, however, is burdock. Much larger leaves. So burdock is one of the plants that I use quite frequently, actually. It's extremely good for the liver, and if you live in America, you probably need help with your liver. One of the plants that I use with it, there's a saying that whatever plant you need will grow near you, or find a way to grow near you, and that's why dandelion grows everywhere. But burdock is a sister plant to dandelion in use. Everyone has liver issues, everyone needs burdock, and dandelion does similar things. Burdock, or Arctium lapa, has a few fun things. The most noticed or well-known part of burdock are the little flower heads. They have all these hooks around them, and if you walk by, they'll accumulate on you, they'll grab onto you. They've got little purple flowers on the top, but then they're like a vase with all these hooks around the outside. And that grabbing that it does to clothing is something that was noticed, and people, if they lost a button, they would just throw Burdock in there and have an extra button. But eventually, Burdock is what led to the invention of Velcro. And so there are a couple that are a little bit grabby, and Burdock has that. Burdock's actions mainly come from the root, and it is a liver and kidney tonic. It generally helps with liver and kidney rebuilding and health. It's also an extremely good detoxification agent. It increases what's called phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. Those are jobs that the liver does. Phase 1 is making it water soluble, or I could get really technical, but let's just say that it helps detoxify it, usually making it water soluble. And this is something that like alcohol will go through. But there are also things that go through it that are medications, are all going to be handled in phase 1 and 2 detoxification usually. And I mean, the stuff that we put in our water and our food and our air, but also some things that are naturally in plants, because they don't always want to be eaten, needs to be detoxified, otherwise it would be poison to our body. And our liver handles a lot of that, as does our kidney. The liver does the detoxification. Kidney processes it so you can pee out a lot of it. So with Burdock, if we have, say, fatty liver disease, if we have cirrhotic liver, if we have high cholesterol, if we have atherosclerotic plaque in our heart, liver's supposed to help with all of that. It does cholesterol processing. And so if our liver's not happy, you guys have heard the saying, if mom's not happy, no one's happy. The liver's mom. You might have a favorite organ. If I asked you, you might say the brain, you might say the heart. If you ask the brain and the heart, though, they would say the liver. The liver puts out tons of things into the blood that helps all of the other organs in the body. It regulates our blood sugar, it regulates our blood fats. It also regulates a lot of the proteins that go in the blood. And so if our liver isn't functioning, everything in the body feels it. And if we improve liver health with a good liver tonic and detoxification, so it can get rid of the garbage that accumulates in there, because our liver also is something that's supposed to put garbage out into the intestines. If we help it actually do that, then everything else in the body tends to work a little better, or a lot better, depending. So Burdock is a fantastic one. There are some sister plants that you want to use short term. Burdock is the one where you can use it longer term. It's pretty dang safe. I occasionally will do a medication check against it because some things are processed in the liver, and it's like, your liver might get too good at processing that out. But in general, it's a very safe plant, and you can use it long term, and it's one that I recommend to a lot of my patients and see good results. Fun story on the side. I had a patient come in who had a lot of acne. And across the back, across the face, the jaw, the neck, it was a lot of acne, and it wasn't what they wanted. And that was one of their concerns. And not everyone's aware of this, but hormones are processed in the liver. They're recycled there. Hormones also play a lot into skin health. And I made a mix that had Burdock in it, along with Yellow Dock and a couple other things that are really helpful. And then I gave it to her and said, go ahead and take this for a week. And at the end of the time she was taking it, she'd had something along the lines, I didn't count, but roughly 60% reduction. And I had another patient who had 90% reduction. And I've had other patients, there are other patients who have had similar results. And so, and then I asked her, oh, and did you finish it? And she said, no, I only did half of it. And so it is an extremely good plant for liver health. The liver's sidekick as well. The liver's sidekick is the skin. When the liver gets backed up and can't handle all the work, which is the case with a lot of people, or at least it's struggling with it and slower with it, it calls in its sidekick, the skin. When we sweat, we actually can find lots of things in sweat that are being pumped out. Some kinds of heavy metals included. Lead, for example, you can find in sweat. And if you find it there, then that's not great, because we don't like lead. but you can find a number of other toxic agents. And so if you have a lot of breakouts, some of it can be the hormone picture, some of it can also be that the liver's saying, hey skin, I can't get rid of this through the bile and the intestines. So be the Robin to my Batman. And then it goes out on the skin and we see that. So not every acne breakout is because of liver issues, but liver does a lot of things. So extremely helpful plant. How do we identify it? Burdock has extremely large leaves its first year, and the early leaves in the second year. It is a 2-year plant like Mullein, follows a similar growth pattern in the sense that it is a basal rosette in year 1, and then in year 2 it'll throw up a stem or stalk to go ahead and start having the reproductive organs, the flowers and such, come onto it. The second year leaves, going up the stalk, again, forgive me for having such beautiful plant presses. Family reunion was right after I started these and I couldn't check on them. So gorgeous professional presses, I know. But notice they're smaller. So the newer ones are going to be smaller. They go up the stalk, and the stalk has a lot more branching than, like Mullein's just a straight stalk, very limited leaves coming off of it. There's not like secondary stalks. Burdock, there's a lot of off branching. And the easiest time to identify burdock is once it gets those vase-like purple-topped grabby flowers that we talked about. Those haven't shown up on the burdock near my house yet, so I don't have one to show you. That's a little later in the season. But besides just the general look of burdock, once those flowers show up, you're pretty good. But what about first year? Because if you want the root, you need to get it between first year and second year. That's a general rule, because it dies off after that. So you need to be able to identify it before it goes into the flowering phase, because that's when it's like, bye.
So they only last 2 years? They only last 2 years?
Yep. So occasionally you can find a strange one, but typically. So the way that you identify it, there are 2 lookalikes. Mullein doesn't have lookalikes, by the way, so that one's why I didn't mention any there. Makes it really nice as a beginner plant, very safe. But there are more than 2 lookalikes, but 2 main ones. One of those is rhubarb. So rhubarb, some of you might have had yourself or your grandma make your rhubarb pie. Rhubarb can be delicious when it's prepared properly. If it's not prepared properly, it actually is not a very friendly plant. You have to cook out some of the, I believe they're cyanogens, so cyanic compounds. So, and those aren't great to have a lot of, so you have to cook it out. You might have to check on if there's any other processing, because rhubarb is one that's more of a food than a medicine.
That's cyanide, right?
Yeah.
Cyanide.
Yep. Good
We
question.
wouldn't have rhubarb around here, so we'd probably be sick though.
Some
Too
grows
hot
not.
for rhubarb.
Okay, I haven't seen any since I've been here, so, but we're not too far off from where it can grow, but
Oh, really?
yeah, you can get some not too far north of here, actually. But I haven't seen it in this exact area.
Ah,
So I think in the Great Lakes area, maybe the lakes cool it down enough is probably what's going on. But
that's rhubarb?
this one is burdock.
Oh,
But to tell them apart, rhubarb has a similar shaped leaf,
Oh.
wavy edges, very big, and the stem of both of them are kind of, they have lines, it's rough on the outside, and it's also green and red. Identical so far, unless you really want to get into technicalities of exactly how the waves on the leaves go, which I'll spare you. But ringlets. One thing that is different between rhubarb and burdock is that the underside of the rhubarb leaf is smooth. The underside of the burdock leaf, which is what we're looking at right now, I'm kind of embarrassed to show you the top side. I know, perfect press. You see how it's a little darker. On the other side, it's lighter. A lot of that is because there's little hairs that are more apparent on the plant that hasn't been pressed. And so it's pretty obvious on the living plant. Burdock has a soft, hairy underside. The stem, if you cut it, is hollow. Rhubarb's stem is solid. So those are the two ways you can tell it apart pretty concretely. Burdock has the two H's, hairy and hollow. So, now there is another lookalike called skunk cabbage. One way you can tell it apart is it really likes to get its feet wet. It goes into marshy places. Burdock doesn't like its feet super, super wet. It does like it moist though, so I don't feel like that's the best differentiation. If you really know your habitat, then you can go off of that, but I don't think that's super friendly at the beginning. So the other way you can do it is skunk cabbage. The stalk is smooth, doesn't have little ridges that burdock has. It's also completely green. There's none of this little purpling that you can get with burdock. And this one, the purpling is down towards the base, and this one I cut off. There was some purpling on it before it dried. I thought it would be good enough. Towards the base, it has a lot more. You're probably not going to be able to see it. Again, apologies for my professionalism on my presses. Skunk cabbage is smooth and green on the stalk. It also doesn't have hair on the underside of the leaf. So, pretty much, burdock is hairy. The other ones aren't. That'll help you out. So, Arctium lapa. Any questions on burdock or its uses?
You use the root the same as you do the leaves, or what part of burdock you use?
Excellent question, and this is one of the reasons why I like to have secondary sources or have more than one source, because that's something to mention, isn't it? The root is the part that I've been talking about for the use. The leaves, they're edible, but let me just warn you, they taste fantastically bitter. They are more bitter than gentian, which if anyone's ever had a bitter tonic, it's like, I'm drinking this literally because it is bitter. That's gentian. This is more bitter. When you get the old leaves. If you get the young leaves, a lot better. Still survival food or herbless to tongue. Like if you don't taste bitter anymore, like me, then that's slightly hyperbole, but then you can go for it. But the leaves are mostly for survival food or people who want to wrap fish in it and then it gives some flavor to the fish. That's something that people have had good success with and enjoy. I haven't tried that one. The root is much more palatable. It's used in Japan and Asian ethnic food as a vegetable. It's called gobo, and they use it in many of their meals. I've wondered if one of the reasons that stereotypically, Asian populations have much clearer skin than at least it seems like we get over here on average. I've wondered how much of that's because of some of the medicinal foods that they have in their day-to-day diet. So, good question. You'd use the root. You'd probably use it either as a powder or a decoction, which is a boiled tea. All right, we'll go ahead and shift to our third one. Here's our last friend. You might like this friend, but it probably likes you more. This one is one that will follow you out of your excursions. Anyone have a guess on what this is? Chickweed's not a bad guess. That's somewhat similar. This one's cleavers. So, quick story. I was out doing one of my plant walks, just kind of enjoying nature, looking for new plants in the area because I'm still learning all the ones that are here. And I saw this guy and I leaned down and I picked him up and I was like, ooh, I think yes, it is. And I took a sample to take home and I realized I didn't bring any of my plant pouches with me. I said, put it on my back, and then continued walking. And it stuck there the rest of the hike. Cleavers is called cleavers because it grabs you. It's got little hooks. Burdock has the little Velcro bit up top. Cleavers is entirely Velcro. I think it should have been invented off of this guy, personally. People wrestle through their fields daily and curse this name. I had someone down in Siloam. I was doing this yesterday at Siloam Springs Library, and someone was like, I can't get rid of it. It's always in the house, no matter how many times I take it out, because it just follows me in. And then some other people were commenting on how their dog always has these little dots all over it. And it's like, the brush is breaking. It's like, yeah, I'm sorry for cleavers. But the Latin name is Galium aparine. And this is actually a particularly useful plant. We already talked a little bit about one of its actions. with another plant. But this mullein had an action where it helped with immune function in the lungs because it moved lymph, right? It's kind of funny to me, but most lymph movers, they act in one area really well, and then the rest of it really weakly. And it's like, why is it different? I know that, the heart has different, alpha beta receptors than the veins down in your legs do and stuff like that, but in herbs, they're usually general. They usually attach to multiple receptors, I guess, with hormones. That's not entirely true with phytoestrogens. Anyway, but usually they're more general. This one is the one that makes me happy. I don't know what lymphagogue to use. Use Galium. Galium hits all of it. Galium is a body-wide lymph mover. So we talked about lymph a little earlier, how it helps as a TSA checkpoint and boosts your immune system. Let's talk a little bit more about what a lymphagogue can do for you. Lymphagogue is the fancy word for lymph mover. I don't know if you guys know this, but we're aliens, okay? We have not one circulatory system, but two. So the first one, you're probably familiar with. Heart goes pump, pump, blood goes scoot, scoot, goes around the body. Our second circulatory system, the one that we don't really hear about a whole lot, is the lymphatic system. So the blood, when it comes down, we got cells over here, and we have the blood vessel right here, right? And the blood needs to get over there to be useful. Otherwise, it's not doing very much. So all the blood vessels are holy. They're permeable. And so the blood comes out. And it does stuff over here with the cells and delivers nutrients and oxygen and all that. And then some of it goes back into the blood vessels, but that's kind of like trying to put water. Blood vessels are high pressure, by the way. That's trying to put the plasma or blood back into the blood vessels after it's come out. That's like trying to take water and put it back into a garden hose that is still on. Challenging. Intellectually challenging. So we need to have a second exit for all the stuff that can't make it back in. Some of it does, but for the stuff that can't make it back in. And that second exit is the lymphatic tube. And then that goes up the lymph nodes where you have all those security checkpoints, and all of that eventually makes it back up into your superior vena cava to rejoin your blood supply. And that's why you don't, run out of blood. So knowing this, what do you think happens with swelling? Swelling is a lack of lymph movement. It's not being picked up and brought back up. The heart moves the blood. It doesn't move lymph. Lymph is moved in a different way. Does anyone have any idea how that might happen? What's the pump for lymph? I've only had someone know this once, so don't feel bad. Imagine your muscle right here. Imagine flexi, like Arnold. Go ahead and wrap saran wrap around that, and then flex again in your mind. You probably can tell that would feel very tight. We're taking up more space, and the saran wrap is holding it in place, and so it feels tight. Okay, well, you can stop imagining. In real life, we actually do have saran wrap around our muscles there. It's just beneath the skin instead of above. One of the connective tissues I mentioned earlier, fascia, it wraps muscles. If you've ever had chicken breast or chicken legs, and that white stuff that's kind of, like chewy on the outside, that's fascia. It wraps all of our muscles. And so when we flex, no matter how much or little there is there to flex, the more space is taken up. And the lymph vessels running through there, they get squished. Instead of the expansion going outside, the expansion of the muscles goes inside to the hollow lymph vessels and squishes them and moves all the lymph in these one-way channels. And so muscle contraction is one of the main ways that we move lymph. There's also some smooth muscle that's around it, and the smooth muscle is what Galium acts on. It helps move the lymphatics that way. So when is a lymphatic useful? For immune function, to reduce swelling, and to help deliver herbal or nutrients of any kind and waste to the cells and away from the cells. Because if the lymph isn't moving, then it's hard to get new fluid into the cell area because it's overflowing, so to speak. So lymphatics are good for a heck of a lot of things. Wound healing as well, because if you have stagnation of the fluid, then you don't get the new nutrients there for wound healing. So lymphatics are just kind of generally, it's one that I throw into a lot of my formulas for that reason. This one, however, Galium is best used fresh. If you use it dried, it's a lot less potent. So, the part that you use is everything above ground. And for identification, well, it'll find you. It's pretty helpful that way. It's like the annoying younger brother. It crawls all over everything and then ties it into a knot. It's kind of like, go away. Except then you realize later in life that it was keeping your family together anyway. So, you know. But it's a crawler. It's a long crawler. One stem comes out of a root, and then it'll bind up everything around it. So, it's also got these fun little leaf junctions that most other plants don't have. Notice right there, we have a whole bunch of leaves coming out of one node, one spot. Most plants have one leaf or two leaves coming out of a spot. This guy has 6 to 8. And they come out in a spiral pattern.
They look like leaves, you know.
Yep. Fun little botany thing that we'll go ahead and probably be closing on. If leaves come out, my forearms are stems right now. If leaves come out like this, that's called alternate branching. One leaf, then the other. If leaves come out like this off of the stem, it's called opposite branching. 2 leaves at a time. Sometimes they'll also rotate back and forth, and that's another special thing that you can watch for. But when, now my fingers are leaves, a whole frick ton of leaves come out in one place, we call that whorled, W-H-O-R, whorled. And so looking for whorled on this guy, that's a special leafing pattern that you don't see terribly often, helps you identify him. He does have one look-alike, sweet bed meadow. This guy has smaller leaves and more of them. Bed meadow has 4 to 6. This guy's got 6 to 8. These ones are smaller and very fine. Bed meadows are kind of chunky. Also, this one has the hooks grabbing so that if you took a leaf and pulled towards you and away from it, it's going to be grabbing you a lot. The hooks are going back towards the stem. Sweet bed meadow has the hooks going out towards you, not towards its own stem. Cleavers wants to cleave and keep you where it is. Sweet bed meadow wants you to go away. So, those are 3 plants. We talked about mullein, we talked about burdock, and we talked about cleavers. 3 plants that are growing in the area, and they're quite useful for herbal medicine. Any questions on any of those before we close out that bit?
Make a tea out of it, or what do you do with it?
Awesome question. So, cleavers, or Galium apparang, you usually would go ahead and either eat, because it's not too unpleasant, or you do an extraction, because you need to do it while it's fresh. And making teas out of fresh plants, you can do that, but you would want to make sure that you bruise it and grind it quite well, because when they're fresh, all the cell walls in the plant haven't been broken by the drying process. And so you can make a tea out of the fresh plant, but you're going to need to be pretty rough on it. So you probably have a couple tablespoons worth of fresh plant material would be a good amount to put in the tea, as long as you get it nice and bruised.
Found just along the roadside, or in the woods, or where is typical to find any of these?
So this one, Galium, you'll find in meadows where it starts to get a little bit moister, and it likes binding up everything around it. And so trail sides are a good one as well, because it likes a little bit of activity. And actually that's true for most of these, because that's where I've been walking, and so that's what I'm finding are the ones that like that habitat. Mullein likes disturbed places even more than Galium does. And you'll sometimes see a whole bunch of it on a hillside. It likes to have disturbed areas and open areas. Burdock likes it a little wetter than the other 2. And but if it gets to the point where it's like squishy, it's not going to grow there. And so it'll be up on the side where the bog is ended and it's starting to transition away. So, good question on the habitats. Any others? All right, cool. So, that closes out the plant discussion. Few fun events that I have going on that are coming up. Actually, Grove Library and J Library next month, or maybe the month after, we're still setting down the date. We're going to be doing a plant walk where we actually go outside and go among all the plants and just see what we see. So keep an eye out for that. Down in Tahlequah, we're doing a Tastes of the Wild event. If you go to their sign up, it's early next month. Space is limited, so you'll sign up with them. Library cards for Grove are good all through the county, so it can be shared like that. Taste of the Wild will be tasting things that came from the wilds. Go figure. But that should be fun. We'll be talking about their uses while we taste them. And I guess the other two things. One, I am teaching an herbalism class. I've got one cohort going. I'm also going to be opening my second cohort here in a month or two. And so that's Foundations of Herbalism, where we talk about how to formulate, how to think like an herbalist, and how to not go to blog posts and be like, okay, there's 6 plants that say it's good for joint disease. I hope they're right. And then just doing it. You'll be able to reason out why. We're also going to go over medicine making. We're also going to go over all the herbal actions. We're also going to go over 40 monographs and what monographs are. They're extremely important. If you don't know what monographs are, then that's something every herbalist needs to know. That's one of our foundations. And how to do herbal research. So, got those coming up. If you're interested in that, let me know and we'll talk. I guess the last thing is, I have a clinic down in Jade, so if you're looking for natural health care, we can definitely talk. There's a 15-minute sign up right over there that's free where you can ask any questions.
I wanted to ask you a question about a plant called Double Fantasy. It grows in Bermuda, and it was the name of John Lennon's last album he made. And it's supposedly a flower or a plant. I think it was a plant. And I was wondering if you ever heard of that plant.
That's interesting. Well, I only know one fact about it now. No, I haven't heard about it before. That's
The name of the plant is the
look
Double
for it.
Fantasy. I think
Yeah.
Same as the album title.
Yeah, that'll make it memorable. If you know the Latin name, there might be a better chance. I know those ones better. Common names, the reason we use Latin, I think that in this case, common's probably cooler. But the reason the Latin names are usually there is because everyone uses
It's
the
more
same one.
descriptive.
Yeah, but I haven't heard of that common name, and to be honest, if it grows in Bermuda, probably don't know the Latin name either. But I'll have to keep an eye on it. So, good stuff. If that's all, thank you guys for coming. And this is a monthly event, so next month on, let's see, this is Grove. Second Wednesdays at 5:30, we'll have 3 new plants. So, thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Enjoyed your lecture.
Thank you.